Hi, Gayle. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I think you brought up some really good points about the Michelle Carter case. I agree with you that the case gained so much attention, mostly because of the sheer number of texts between Michelle and Conrad and how shocking it was to see someone so actively push someone else towards suicide. That element of the case was definitely what made it stand out, and especially the evidence that Michelle had this power over him, which makes the situation so much more disturbing. Um, on the topic of whether encouraging suicide should be a crime, I think you highlighted a key issue between balancing freedom of speech and protecting someone's life. It's tough because like like you mentioned, the First Amendment gives us freedom of speech, but there's also a moral responsibility to intervene when someone's life is at risk. And I think the case just shows how dangerous this can be, and it might be something to consider. And especially in today's digital age where people can be easily influenced by others online. But as you said, it's morally wrong even if it's difficult to legislate. So, regarding Michelle's decision to opt for the bench trial, I agree that you take, I agree on your take that she should probably wanted to avoid the media attention and make the situation less public. The media surrounding her case was very intense, and a jury trial might have just made it worse for her, especially since it's so emotionally charged. I think the defense team wanted to minimize potential biases of public influence, and I can see how a judge might have seemed like a more predictable option. I also think you made a good point about the judge's decision. While the verdict and sentence were fair, considering Michelle's age and mental state at the time of the text could have been important factors. You're right that she was young and dealing with her own struggles, and maybe that should have influenced her sentence, but at the same time, her actions were extremely harmful, and there needed to be consequences for that. So, now moving to your thoughts on gender and homicide, I completely agree that using a gender lens helps us understand why men are more likely to commit homicide. The socialization of men to be dominant, aggressive, and in control plays a big role in this. You mentioned honor contests, and I think it's important to recognize how these expectations drive men to settle disputes through violence. You're also right that these contestants or contests are gendered because women are socialized to resolve conflicts in less public and in more private ways. And it's interesting to see how gendered behavior plays a role in crime, especially when we consider how it impacts men and women differently. So, as for suicide versus homicide, I think you're spot on by saying that suicide is more common and yet homicide gets more media attention. It's true that suicide is often seen as more taboo and there's less open conversation about it, even though it affects far more people. I think the stigma around mental health makes it harder for people to seek help, especially men, who are more likely to succeed in suicide attempts due to the methods they tend to use. And the gender paradox of suicide behavior is definitely a compelling concept. Like you said, it's interesting how men are less likely to seek help, which leads to higher fatality rates. This again speaks to societal pressures on men to not show vulnerability or emotions, which makes them less likely to reach out for support. Meanwhile, women are often more socialized to express their feelings and may feel more likely to tell people, so they survive attempts due to less lethal methods. Um, and then finally, your thoughts on um, gender equality in traditional law. Sorry, I am recovering from being sick. Um, Gender equity in traditional law, um, and the pre-colonial responses to rape were really insightful. And I just want to thank you for sharing your insights. It's been great to hear from you and your perspective on these concepts.